Hello everyone! My mermaid dolls have been especially popular lately, so I thought it'd be fun to show you how I make them. I have a pattern that I've made for each individual piece so that it's easy to just trace them and cut everything out in the same exact size each time I make a new doll. I started with a sketch and then made a rough outline on trace paper, and for any of the pieces that I wanted symmetrical, I folded the trace paper exactly in half and then cut, and that ensures that both sides end up even. The mermaid design was actually based off of just my regular doll that was my first creation, but I adjusted the shape of the body on the bottom a little bit and added the tail. I have one main part for the body, front and back, and this is how I suggest that you make your first pattern, especially if you want to try making your own doll and are new to the process. It's a lot easier to just have one main front piece, one main back piece, and then just attach a lot of little details to the outside of it, rather than trying to work with a bunch of separate arms and legs and things like that. I also have 4 pieces for the 2 parts of the tail. Remember, everything that you want to stuff for your doll, you need a front piece and a back piece. I also have 2 irises, 2 whites of the eye, 2 kind of eye makeup teardrop shapes that go around the eye, and lips. Additionally, I cut out some tiny black and white circles for the pupil and a reflection on the eye that really just finishes it off. The first thing I like to do is just get the face finished. So I'm going to go ahead and lay out all the face pieces where I want them and pin them down so they don't move. I use embroidery thread. I have a ton of this stuff and I've literally gotten all of it for free because people just have this lying around in their house for whatever reason and don't want it anymore and never use it all. So I have been given so much of this. Just ask around. I'm sure you know someone who has this stuff. Now, embroidery thread comes with 6 single threads wrapped together in a big string, and I use 2 at a time. That's a good thickness for me that isn't too heavy but is a little more sturdy than just using 1. To pull it apart, I cut the full length that I want and then peel my 2 threads apart from the group in the middle, and starting in the middle I just keep pulling and pulling slowly until it works its way apart. So first I'm going to be sewing around the perimeter of the white of the eye, and I usually choose a darker color for this, kind of like eyeliner, and I'm going to be doing a straight stitch. So to do this, I went ahead and knotted my thread and stuck it up through the back so it hides the knot, and now I'm sticking my thread in downwards into the felt and then bringing it back up with a space in between. So I'm keeping about an equal space in between. And then I'm going to go backwards for a bit and go back in where the last stitch ended. So you see, you kind of end up wrapping in a way, leaving a space each time, but then going backwards to fill in that space. And that just makes your piece a lot more sturdily attached, so it doesn't shift and wiggle and it isn't easy to pull it off. So it's called a straight stitch because you end up making a very straight, solid line. Now, for areas where you need to curve, what you do is you just make your stitches smaller. So your stitches don't have to all be the same length because it's going to make a solid boundary outline anyway. So as I'm going around the curves, I just make my stitches a little bit smaller so that they follow that curved shape. Once I'm done, I take my thread to the back, which is going to get very messy, and on the back of the face I go ahead and I just make a loop, and then I take my needle straight through that loop I've just made, and that creates a knot. Now I like to, especially when I'm working with a lighter toned felt, go ahead and knot and cut off my thread after each step that I do. You could also just bring your thread all the way across the back and start with another piece, but I found with these lighter colors, sometimes a darker color thread will end up showing through, and so you'll end up with little light lines that you can see through from the back of your face. So I try to just cut it off and start with a new knot for each step of the process so that this doesn't happen. Now for the lips, we're using another straight stitch. And you could just go completely straight across, or you could make your lines angled a little bit in kind of a V shape with the downward point of the V landing right in the middle of the lips. You could make it a more exaggerated smile. I tend to make mine a little more straight, but you could really put any expression on these that you want, which is really fun. Now I'm going to use a straight stitch again to secure the fabric that's underneath the white of the eye that gives our little bit of decoration. And I choose for this part to pick a thread that's basically the same color as that fabric so that it just kind of fades into the fabric and doesn't really show. Of course, that part is completely up to the creator. Now I just keep layering, working from what's in back to what's going to end up on top. And I'm going to add my irises. And for these, I really just make 5 or 6 stitches starting on the outside of the circle and pointing towards the center to really easily secure it, and that's it. The irises and highlights will need to be stitched through, and this further secures that whole piece to its base. And so for these, I'm taking the black and the white matching thread, and I'm just stitching an X through these small circles. They're so tiny, that's really all you need. Now, since I'm going to end up using this same light brown thread for the nose, and it is a lighter color that's really similar to the face, this time I don't have to cut the thread and restart. I'm just going to carry it right over and come up through the back. And for the nose, still doing the same idea of the straight stitch, but there's only 2 parts to it. On one side, I make my angled little line a bit shorter, and on the other side a bit longer, and that just gives a really simple, cute impression of a nose. That's all you need. Nose outlines can really easily start to look bad and creepy, so the simpler the better when it comes to noses, trust me. Once we have all of our face detailed out, then I'm going to pin it to the front body shape, and we're going to go ahead now and attach this face to the body piece. So for all my face components, I use felt, and for the body, I use upholstery fabric. Now, a step you didn't see is I just dab with my finger a little bit of fray check or even just clear fabric adhesive along the outside edge of my upholstery fabric pieces and let that dry before I begin sewing. And this just ensures that the fabric doesn't start fraying or the threads don't start coming out. And again, it's just something that makes this very much a lasting product. These can actually be played with. They're fun to display, but kids can actually take these on adventures with them. I know quite a few kids that have them, and they have survived through some pretty wild playtimes. So that's always great. That's the goal. Now for the rest of my sewing, I'm going to use my second hand stitch, the blanket stitch. I only use 2 different stitches for these, really simple. Now for my blanket stitch, I'm sticking my needle in along the edge of the face through the upholstery fabric and then letting it go back up a little bit through the felt piece so that the 2 are attached together, and this creates a loop, and then I am going in through that loop, and that makes my blanket stitch. So it's a process of sticking my needle through the upholstery fabric real close to the edge of that felt, then back up through the felt, making a loop, and pulling my needle and thread through the loop, just over and over and over again. Once I meet up with my original stitch and I've gone all the way around the circle, then I'm going to knot it off again and cut the thread. Now, to attach the 2 body pieces together, I also use a blanket stitch. I start by taking my thread up through the center so that my knot is hidden between the 2 pieces of fabric. You want the knot on the inside always. That's really important. That just looks way more tidy when it's done. And then I'm going back under, creating a loop, pulling my thread through that loop. And then after that point, it's real easy. I can just stick my needle straight down through both pieces of fabric, which again makes that open loop, and then pull my needle and thread straight through, just over and over and over again. So I am always just going straight down through my fabric from the top, and then pulling my needle and thread through the loop that's made. So this goes really, really fast actually once you get going. I'm starting at the neck, and I'm going to stop once I go all the way around the body to the other side of the neck. I'm not sewing around the head at all yet, because we're going to have to stuff this body in 2 steps. First, everything below the head, and then the head last. I like to get all my sewing done and then just stuff everything at the end. So before I start any stuffing, I'm also going to sew together my little pieces for my mermaid tail. Again, same way, just blanket stitch around the outside edge. You can use the same color or something different, up to you. And I want to go ahead and leave about 1 inch open at the top so that I'm able to stuff it easily. When you're sewing around the body, you will run out of thread, because if you were to cut a thread long enough to go around the entire body, it would be way too long to work with and difficult, and it would keep getting knotted and tangled. So if you run out of thread, you just knot it off, stick the tail on the inside, and then go ahead and take your other knotted piece and just keep going just like you did when you started, where you make the loop first, knot it, keep going all the way around. For stuffing, I like to use a wooden chopstick, specifically the wooden ones, because they're rough and you need something that's going to grip the stuffing a little bit. Anything that's not kind of a rough wood, I've noticed it just goes right through the stuffing and doesn't really gather it up or push it down. So that's what I've found works, especially the ones that are really not that great that you like get for free at the grocery store sushi counter. Like, those are perfect. And so I'm just taking my polyfill stuffing a little bit at a time and using the chopstick to make sure it gets all the way into the bottom. You actually need more stuffing than you think you need, because you want it to be packed pretty tight actually, so that it has body and really keeps its shape. You basically want it to be as stuffed as you can get it without the seams splitting apart on the side. Once you have it stuffed, then you can go ahead and stitch up your hole. And I like to knot off the end of my thread then and just stick it straight through and have it come out of the middle. That hides the tail, and then I can just snip the extra. For the body, same thing. I'm just stuffing it a little bit at a time. And especially with the bottom of the tail and the arms, you just want to use little pieces a little bit at a time so that you don't end up overstuffing it, and as I said, kind of splitting your threads. But even for the larger part of the body, you don't want to just shove a big huge pile of it in all at once. You still want to do it a little bit at a time, because that comes out a lot nicer and more even. If you try to stuff in big globs, then it ends up really, really lumpy at the end. Once you have the body mostly stuffed, then you can go ahead and continue sewing around the head. Again, making sure that you leave a big enough gap so that you can continue stuffing. The head, you have to be a little more careful, and you have to kind of fluff it and push the stuffing around, push on the top of the face and kind of get it evenly distributed, because if you don't watch, you could easily end up with the head ending up kind of distorted if it's unevenly stuffed, where it's higher on one side and lower on the other, or it can just get a little weird. So you want to make sure that you're constantly kind of re-fluffing it as you stuff the head so that it ends up in even shape. I'd say that's probably the hardest part. Before it's completely done, I also like to take 2 toothpicks and stick them in the neck right in the middle of all the fluff. And this adds just a little more stability so that we don't end up with a head that's flopping, especially since we have that thinner neck. Towards the end, you'll stitch a little bit more so that there's just a tiny opening, and when you just have that real little opening left, you might have to add a little more stuffing here and kind of push it around here and there. But then you are all set and can just stitch it back up and knot it. Okay, I lied. One of the hardest parts is probably putting the tail pieces on. It's not that it's really hard per se, it can just be a little bit awkward because the pieces are all stuffed now. So to get them sewn together and completely attached while they're kind of bulging and don't want to lay down flat and all that, it can be a little bit of a hassle and a little bit tedious, but luckily there isn't much to sew. I start with the back tail piece and lay it where I want it, kind of smush both pieces between my fingers, and then I'm going along the edge of the tail and doing another blanket stitch to just attach the two together. And I'm trying to line up my blanket stitch along the row of stitches that's already there on the end of that tail, just so it looks a little bit neater. So that took care of the front, but I also need to attach this tail piece in the back. So I need to flip it over and then go ahead and do a blanket stitch along the edge of the tail that touches against the end there on the back. Then I'm laying my second piece on top and doing the same thing, looking at the front. Wherever that little tail piece touches part of my body, I'm going ahead and just blanket stitching along that, attaching the two together, then turning it around and fusing the back to the back of the tail as well. Yay, our doll is created. Now it's just time for the embellishments. I always add a ribbon around the neck, not just because it looks really cute, but also, again, added stability. Having a big head with a little skinny neck, sometimes over time, if you don't do that, it can get a little floppy, so this prevents that. You don't need much ribbon, even just little tiny remnants or scraps work great. So this is a great way to use up ribbon scraps. Sometimes with the ribbon, I also like to hang something off of it, like a necklace, and I also like to oftentimes put something in the hair. I like to shop at antique stores, antique fairs, shops on eBay for the vintage millinery flowers, specifically the really cool velvety ones like these, and these make fantastic accents for my dolls. For the hair, I usually blend together two colors. I think pink and blonde would look really cool with this one. So then I cut little teardrop and moon shaped pieces for the hair, just real simple shapes, and I just cut a bunch of them, different thicknesses, different lengths, just so there's a variety. That yellow was just too much of a really bold Crayola yellow. I wasn't liking it, so I dug around and I ended up finding a really pale yellow that's a lot more close to what I'm looking for, so yay. Once I lay everything out, make sure it all matches, make sure I like it, then I just use hot glue to attach all of these pieces, and a little bit goes a long way. So I'm really just smoothing a thin layer of hot glue on the back of everything. You don't want to have it globbed, like really use as little as possible. Well, I think she turned out really cute. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning how I make my dolls. I sell a lot of these in person and locally in some shops, but for those of you that may not live around me and would be interested in snagging a mermaid doll, I do plan to start posting them in my eBay store. I just haven't got around to it yet, and I need to replenish my stash right now, so I'll be working on that. But go ahead and check out my shop and give it a follow, and I will be posting soon. I also always share pictures of new things that I've finished creating on my Instagram, and you can always send me a message there asking if something's available. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe, and I really hope some of you try to make your own plush dolls at home. It doesn't have to be anything complicated, even if you just start with two pieces, just a front and back, and draw a cute smile on it with a marker, like anything. It's just really fun, and it's something you can definitely do with kids too, so give it a try.